Hi, and welcome to Recovery His Way on the campus of His Way in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm Stuart Whiting here once again with the director, Tom Reynolds. Hey, Tom.
Good to see you.
We've had a number of interviews over the past few weeks on the podcast, and today I want to return a little bit to things going on in the program. And you know, what's just dominated this year, been on the heart and mind of all of us, is this COVID pandemic. And so first I just want to maybe share with our listeners a little bit about what are some of the practical things that have changed around here in response to that?
Right. Well, I mean, I just crystallized always on March 11th. For some reason, that date just kind of stands out as the day that was we had heard the rumblings of it. And then all of a sudden, March 11th, things began to change quickly in our culture and our society. Things were shutting down quickly, and there was a dramatic change. And so everyone was scrambling to figure out what's the best response. And it's a challenge in our environment, obviously, because we are a residential community. I mean, we're living together. We're like 40 people, 50 people who make up a family.
Right.
So, what do you do with the teenagers and the kids and all that to try to protect them in an environment like that? And we're in an environment where every day we're going out, the guys go out and working. So they're out in the community and working, then coming back every day. So the best things we knew to do, obviously, was the first things was doing temperature checks on a regular basis to make sure that we didn't have any temperatures coming in, watching for symptoms. We had set aside originally some quarantine rooms, and we still have some set aside. So if anyone comes up with any symptoms or even has contact issues, that we will, quarantine them until they've been tested and get the results from that test back. We've been fortunate not to have any residents contract COVID at this point. Of course, we've been through it even lately. I mean, this past week, we had a few of our staff people that were out and stuff like that because of it, and they stayed home and they, followed the procedures and those kind of things. We're trying to do all that. We moved our class, from the smaller classroom and the intimate situation we're in, and even devotional that was in a very closed place, to our biggest space. And we've been in that pretty much for the last 6 months, and guys, spread out and, at tables and that kind of thing to try to create as much social distance as we can. But obviously it's still an ever-present threat.
Yeah, it's it's one thing that I think we've always prided ourselves on as a ministry was the sense of family, and it is a family indeed that comes together and immediately tries to fill the maximum amount of space instead of sitting close to one another. Right. And so the classes do feel a little bit different, but thankfully we're able to mostly continue uninterrupted. Obviously, masks are a lot more prevalent on campus, and we've added extra disinfecting trips throughout the day to go through. And so being smart about that. But, I think as I think about the impact of COVID, those are really the easy things to just say, okay, it's a different way of operating. Sure. We can move, we can adjust. But I know there's a lot more serious, difficult thing that's going on with COVID that we've talked about a little bit, and we want to talk about maybe as more of a conversation today. So if someone asks you as an outsider, I mean, you're a trusted voice in this community of substance abuse. Have you seen an impact of COVID in the last, say, 9 months on this community?
Yeah, I would say it's been huge. We're getting ready for graduation coming up this Sunday. We got our biggest graduation we've ever had. I mean, I think we have 9 people graduating. And, I met with them to talk about graduation, kind of our message around graduation. And the very first thing that was brought up was all these guys came in about the time that the COVID thing was beginning, because we're a 6-month program. So, and one of the first voices that came out was how quickly they wanted to find a place, a harbor, a safe place in the midst of this pandemic and just the uncertainty that it created, because every day the rules were changing, every day the threat was there, every day there was this ongoing fear. And for addicts, I mean, addiction is driven by fear, and so when you're constantly barraged with this messaging of all these people are dying, we're gonna get sick, and all these things are happening, and it's terrible, it's awful, it's terrible. I mean, to an addict, that just creates it doesn't necessarily create that they just run out and use because of that, but it creates an uncertainty and insecurity in people in a community that are already incredibly insecure. And so they're imprisoned to that moment. And because addicts are very responsive and tend to be very sensitive, they tend to respond in extreme ways and radical ways sometimes to these insecurities. There's, I think, a heightened substance abuse, I think, is skyrocketing. I see overdoses, going off the charts, suicidal situations. A lot of things are happening in our community that have been really difficult and painful to watch. And so, having a place where people can come and find security and certainty, I think, to be a voice, because we're presenting the gospel still, we haven't changed our message. It's not like we're all about COVID all the time. We're still just teaching the same classes, doing the same things, and we have the same structure. There's a lot of safety and security and harbor here in the midst of this chaos. I think is really important and really helpful to our community.
And adding on to that, often in this community, guys are living paycheck to paycheck,
right,
and at best trying to keep their head above water. And now with the economic uncertainty, even if there weren't if there wasn't this idea of the physical security and safety, just knowing that jobs are being lost and lockdowns are happening, even that would be maybe enough of a stress,
right,
in their life to kind of push them in that direction.
Sure.
Use. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so being able to, we have a strong relationship with a lot of employers, and so being able to get jobs for a lot of guys is easier because they're at his way. In fact, we have a lot of situations where employers find out if a guy is not at his way, he's may lose his job because they know he's not in that drug testing environment. He's not in a secure situation. He's not going to be as reliable as he may have been otherwise. And so, that's definitely been important in a time when jobs are uncertain. Yeah,
you mentioned some things. I was looking of what the expectation was of the impact of COVID in the substance abuse community. And, early on, a recent study came out that said that the pandemic could cause up to 75,000 deaths of despair. And really talking to, that idea of the fear and anxiety. And I think maybe that's a kind of number and a reality that I think a lot of people don't think about. It's easy to say, let's shut down, let's take 6 months and, all retreat and just wait this out. But for a lot of people, and particularly in the substance abuse community or that have mental health already struggling with that, that's just not an option.
Right. Where are you retreating to?
Right.
In a lot of cases, a lot of the guys are homeless or they're in very volatile homes in bad situations. So retreating to what? For some of us who have nice, comfortable homes and are secure financial situations, yeah. Some of us, hey, this has been a nice vacation. We can kind of have a nice little break from traffic jams and work pressures and racing the kids to school and all that kind of stuff. But for people in addiction, who don't have a place to live, where do you retreat to? For people who are already insecure, where's your safety place? It's just, and I think importantly, as we've mentioned in this program before, connection is so critically important to the sobriety process, to overcoming addiction. Lockdowns and all that kind of stuff have created disconnection. They've done they've reversed the process. And I think there's so many things about what is happening that actually is harmful. For instance, one of the things that drug addicts need desperately is structure. And so, a lot of them cling to the fact that they have a job because that gives them a reason to get up in the morning and have a system. And all of a sudden, if that job goes away, or even if they, have some time off work, that just opens up Pandora's box of bad decisions that can be created because of a loss of structure and a loss of connection with people, and getting isolated and lonely all end up driving addiction. And so most of the solutions we have come up with as a society to deal with COVID have actually created problems for the substance abuse community because, support is so important. Having, I mean, for a while, AA meetings weren't meeting, NA meetings weren't happening, those kind of things. Churches aren't meeting. So all those places where you find social connection and support all of a sudden disappeared for an addict. And they didn't have the structure anymore. They didn't have the accountability. They have the encouragement and all those kind of things. And so I think you see a huge spike in substance abuse because of that, and depression, and a lot of the mental health issues end up anxiety and depression and all those things, skyrocket in this kind of environment that we're in right now. And so we're kind of solving one thing, maybe, I'm not even sure that's the case, but solving one thing and creating a huge epidemic in the other direction.
Yeah, at least saying we're very hyper-focused on one part of this, because maybe that's a little bit easier to see and deal with, and it's a little bit of the nuclear option, just to say everyone stop interacting. And it's these other issues are harder to measure and probably are much longer term effects. Right. The fear and anxiety and the spike. Although there are some numbers that have already come out in the last few months that opioid overdoses are up over 50% in some of our major cities. There's been a research done there. Over 40 states reporting increases in opioid-related mortality. I saw an article from Jefferson County here in Alabama that said that they have had, just in the first 6 months of the year, so this includes months that weren't COVID related, there was a spike of like 30% of increased opioid deaths. And I know in Madison County, we've seen some of those too. I didn't get the exact numbers. We've heard some of our local leaders talking about that. And, for people who aren't involved in the substance abuse community and trying to serve them, maybe it's easy to just kind of discount that. Oh, well, they're drug users. I mean, that happens, right? Oh, it's just another statistic. But when you're in this and the stories, and we were talking recently about how many deaths we've seen in very recent and farther back residents. And it's been an unusually high number in the last couple months.
Right, absolutely.
It makes you wonder if, if this wasn't an extra catalyst to what their problems were that they were wrestling with.
Right. Well, definitely. I mean, when I talk to the coroner and those kind of things, and the people dealing with death in Madison County, they're seeing overdose deaths on a much higher rate than we have in the past. I mean, 3 or 4 times the amount. And certainly we've been going to some of those funerals lately. In fact, even last night, I went to a visitation funeral this morning for a young man who graduated our program a number of years ago, who, got isolated again, got back into addiction again, and ended up taking his life. And suicides are up too. And it's one of the first times I've been recently to one of our residents or graduates who, took their own life. And so the despair that's coming is also huge in our society right now.
Yeah, we're not obviously making policy for the broader world at large, or maybe even advocating a lot in that direction, but just the recognition that we are social creatures, and that on page 1 of our Bible, we're given purpose and we're given community. And I know that's at the heart of a lot of what we try to do as a residential program, is restore that sense of identity, and that there is purpose, and that you are part of this broader community. Some of the things that I read, I thought was really interesting. This is being called, the increase in substance abuse during this time is being called a pandemic within a pandemic, this substance abuse rise. And I know I guess in 2018 was the first time since the opioid crisis in particular had been spiking, and the usage and the overdose, that there was a slight decrease. I think maybe around 2%, as I recall. But now that's anything that was maybe gained there is gone.
Right.
And that overlaps, I guess, with what we're seeing here. Right.
Right. And I mean, and it's, for a lot of recovery programs too, we not so much, but a lot of the recovery programs have really dialed back because of these concerns and these threats. And so they're not helping as many people, and there's not the havens, not the harbors to pull into that there were. And I think that's true in a lot of areas too. I mean, in our medical community, I know when you deal with the poverty, the homelessness and the poorer part of our community. Some of the community health organizations have been shut down for a long time. And so health assistance hasn't been made available. I know in our mental health community here, mental health appointments is almost like trying to get into Fort Knox to be able to get a mental health meeting because there's so many restrictions and hesitations. And I know they've tried to bridge that with, telehealth and some of those kind of things, which are great to kind of get you access, but still that one-on-one contact, the hug, the handshake, all those things are so critical. That real genuine connection with people, you can't do it over the phone. You can't do it via Zoom. It just can't be accomplished there. And so there's a lot of mental health resources that are still inaccessible, even if you maybe technically get your appointment via Zoom call. So I think there's still a lot of ramifications there that will continue to impact us for a long time to come.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a complex situation to be sure. I found another article from Harvard, a health webpage they have, and I thought it was interesting that they even recognize that the common truism in recovery culture is addiction is a disease of isolation. And maybe that's the first time I've heard it put that way, but we talk about that a lot. So maybe talking about what are some things, the practical things, or just how are we going to approach continuing to try to serve this community while this is what's all around us?
Right.
What does this community need? And maybe for our listeners and wondering, is what can I do to help in this community? What is that?
Right. Well, I think there's a number of things, obviously. I think when you keep in mind the things I've mentioned, connecting is so critically important. As you mentioned, isolation is really the enemy of sobriety. It's one of the great threats that we have. So helping to work against that isolation, I think, is important. I think continue to maintain structures and those kind of things. I'm glad that churches are getting back into some level of activity, which is helpful. And AA meetings are starting to get, back to some level of activity. Is all these things are good. But to be honest, I would say that one of the real fundamental things is that the reality in our community is that the COVID situation is dangerous. And there's a level in which if we're going to really care about people, we got to take risks. We got to be willing to take risk. I mean, I still go back to and risk within reason. I think you need to be reasonable. But the other side is there's always a trade-off, right? Right. There's always a trade-off. If I want to help somebody, I got to put myself in some jeopardy in order to do that. If somebody's drowning, I got to jump in the pond with them to try to bring them out, and I'm going to put myself at risk with the hope of saving somebody. So if we're not willing to take risk, then we're not going to be able to help anybody. So at some level, are we cautious? Yeah. Do we wear masks? Do we hand wash? Do we sanitize? But we don't stop caring about people. We don't stop engaging people. We might talk to them at a little distance, but we don't stop talking to them. We don't stop meeting them. And I think everyone has to be comfortable with their own willingness to take risk. At what level am I willing to put myself at some level of risk is an important part of the process. And, we've talked about this before, Jesus, interestingly, when he healed the leper, right, he touched him. What he could have announced at a distance, be clean, and never put himself at risk. But Jesus even was willing to put himself at some level of risk because connection for a leper, which is what a lot of addicts are in our culture today. And even, I don't know if you feel it in the community, but sometimes it's like you have leprosy because you could potentially have COVID. And so you have to
cough a little bit.
Right. You have to walk through Publix going unclean or whatever. Jesus was willing to touch that. He was willing to engage that. And I think at some level, if we're serious about really helping people, the reality is we have to put ourselves and our institutions at some level of risk.
I can remember early on a meeting where we were, like everyone else, in that late March trying to figure out, what it was going to look like. And someone brought up, well, but what if we get sued by a current resident, and we gave the option for current residents to go to a different place or go back home and put their program on hold if they were concerned about living communally. But what if they sue us because they contract COVID here? And that's the kind of risk where you say, well, we're not going to stop serving because of the potential that we may face incredible, legal challenges. We're going to be smart within what we can do, but you can't live in that kind of fear.
Sure. And you could live in that kind of fear. You just can't effectively help people in the community we're trying to help and do that.
That's right.
And I think importantly, you go back to the point we started with, Stuart, is that this community, addicts by nature are insecure. They're fearful. And if the community that's trying to help them is simply escalating that fear or creating systems that say, we're not sure either, we're uncertain, we're afraid, then how are we going to help bring hope and security and confidence and comfort to that group of people? So I think we can't fall in that trap.
Right.
We do things to mitigate? Are we smart? Sure. But the reality is, every time you open your eyes and take a breath, you're taking a risk. Mm-hmm. And at some level, we need to recognize that, and we need to live with confidence in the midst of that risk. Now, I'll give you a silly example of that. And this goes back a number of years, but it just, I think, emphasizes and underscores my point. There was this was a number of years ago. I remember it vividly. My wife and I had gone to a restaurant to eat. We were getting ready for a graduation here at His Way. And so we were eating real quick and trying to hustle up and eat and get back. And there was, and so we weren't real connected with what was going on. And all of a sudden there was this kind of stir in the restaurant. There was kind of this agitation. People were uncertain. And I wasn't really, to be honest, I was trying to hurry up and finish because I needed to get to my graduation. Finally, people started, it so happened that the booth that we were sitting in was facing west. And it was the only place where there were windows, and people starting to look kind of through our booth out the window to see what was going on. And then as we caught wind of it, it was that there had been a tornado that had hit not far from where we were and was headed our direction. And I remember people were looking at our windows, seeing if they could see the funnel cloud out the window. Now, I'm thinking more about, I need to finish my dinner so I can get to graduation. This is annoying a little bit. And I remember our waitress got really anxious. She was just super agitated and anxious and that kind of stuff. And so I put down my fork. I turned to her and I said, why don't you sit down with me? I've never been hit by a tornado. And that's silly, but she sat down because it communicated confidence and assurance in the midst of a community that was uncertain. That's what Jesus did when he reached out and touched a leper. And I think that's what we're called to do in this time of uncertainty, is we need to be the people with the voice of confidence, doing what we can do, but recognizing there's no guarantees. The only guarantee that I know I have is that whatever happens in this world, I have an eternal security with a relationship with God, that whether it's COVID gets me or a nuclear bomb gets me or a gunshot gets me or cancer gets me, whether it gets me today or gets me 50 years from now, I have an assurance and a confidence in my relationship with God that ultimately is the thing that gives me the confidence and security to stand in whatever is coming our way.
Yeah, and you have been leading this organization this year with a word in mind that we need to advance. And so, maybe, it's not just enough to not retreat. Well, we shouldn't even just hunker down because, financially speaking, we could be doing some things differently right now to kind of make sure that we're going to be okay if things maybe turn a little bit worse economically, but we're moving forward, building project for our new thrift store, for hiring new people this year, for making plans for going out to Atlanta, and just a variety. The new program that we hope to launch at the first of the year, taking a great deal of time and resources. And maybe from one perspective, it'd be like, why are you doing that now? This is the time just to to make sure you got your house in order and you can weather the storm. And so I appreciate that you've been beating that drum of, no, we're advancing. We're going to be smart and safe with respect to the physical truth and reality of COVID. But it's not going to detract from our mission. It's not going to detract from us reaching out to this community and actually recognizing, to your point of your story there in the diner, that there's a little extra we have to do now. There's an extra level of confidence and of security that we project to say, we're here for you. And, you mentioned isolation. And for those that maybe know they have friends and relatives who maybe they've been in recovery for a long time and been doing great, they're missing those normal weekly, monthly times of connecting. So making that extra effort to say, hey, things okay? Let's get together. We'll wear our masks, or we'll shout at each other across the parking lot, or whatever we need to do. But people, we need each other, and so I appreciate that you have been making that message clear here at His Way, to say we have to let this community know we're here and that we're going to continue. Right,
and I, along with that, if we tell our guys that this is a safe place to be, it's going to be okay, and then we are acting like we're uncertain and insecure, then we got a contradictory message. And I guarantee you, addicts pick up quickly on the real heart of what's going on. They're very aware, they're very alert, they're very sensitive, those kind of things. So seeing that we're not just talking the talk, but we're walking the walk in terms of starting a thrift store, in terms of going to Atlanta, in terms of hiring more people, in terms of improving the program, are all ways that we say, hey, it's okay out here. You're going to be okay. We're safe here. We're in the arms of the Lord. We're going to be okay. And I think that's important. You got to make sure that what you're saying and what you're doing are consistent, or again, you're going to feed into the insecurity of an addict, because the addict quickly understands that a person may be saying one thing and doing something different. They're used to that world, and they know that you can't trust that world, you can't be comfortable in that world, and those kind of things. That's what drives our addiction. And so it's important that we not just say what we believe, but we actually act on what we believe, so that it create a culture of confidence, a culture of assurance and security, not just kind of lip service to the idea that somehow we believe what the Bible says, but then we behave completely differently.
Yeah, because these issues have always been a part of the issues of a strong identity in God and in Christ, and the need for community and for connection and for building a relationship with Christ that gives security. Those have always been part of the message here. It's one thing that appealed to me as I wanted to get involved. And now it is, okay, well, here's a storm that's come through. Have we really built our house on the solid rock, or have we just been maybe not really on board with all of that, and we kind of have some shifting sand. And, it's not to say that everyone has to make the same choices we've made, and maybe it's not possible for different groups to maintain the same level of service they've done and whatever. That's not at all what we're trying to say. It's just that for us, we've been blessed with the amount of space we have here and the way that our living arrangements are, that we have a pretty good way of dealing with the physical side of things. And so then now to lean into the difficulties that brings, to still be able to provide this important service and ministry. I know it's been a blessing to our guys. My sense is that the house, really since COVID has become a reality for us, has been in a really good spirit. And maybe that's because they recognize this safe harbor in the midst of all the chaos. I hope so.
I hope so too.
All right. Well, enjoyed talking to you about this, and I know we'll be struggling with this for months to come. And maybe there's some new normals that we're going to have to deal with, but we can still provide our ministry in this.
And one of the great things I love is that every challenge gives us an opportunity to grow and change. And there's nothing better than challenges like this to help us get better. And so I hope our guys grasp how much better they can become, and I hope we model that in the kind of ministry we are, that we're going to continue to be better through these times of challenge.
Well, I think you've definitely led us down that path so far, and I expect that to continue. All right. Well, if you have any questions or like more information, we invite you to visit our website at hiswayinc.org.